On today's Locked On Jayhawks, what offseason decisions are ahead both with the current roster, the possible external roster for KU basketball, and Bill Self?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of LOJ, we're going over the offseason overhaul that is probably going to come to the KU basketball roster. We're going to kind of preview the big decisions ahead for Bill Self and Kansas basketball. Also finish up with a little bit of talk about Darryn Peterson, who was just in Lawrence playing at Haskell for a concluded tournament in which his team ended up winning. And you know, I guess the importance of Darryn Peterson coming into this roster for KU and maybe some interesting guys for KU who showed up, as well as some comments from Darryn Peterson. So we're going to get into the internal decisions, the guys on the current roster or could stay on the current roster. Then we'll get into external decisions that Bill Self and the team has to make. First, this episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Okay, let's start with the current roster. Who's in tow for KU from this year's roster moving forward to next year? So already you know DeJuan Harris, Shaquille Moore, KJ Adams, Hunter Dickinson, Zeke Mayo. Those players have graduated. Sure, there's that possible rule looming of the fifth-year thing, but it doesn't seem like that's happening at this point, or if it does, I don't know, it feels like it'd be later in the game. So I think it is the easy assumption just to say that, you know, those guys are gone. You look at the high school recruits that you have committed in tow. We're going to talk about Darryn Peterson later on in the show. Well, he obviously is the big one that you have coming into the program as a freshman. You also do have Simi's Calderon, and then you have Bryson Tiller. Technically, he redshirted this year, basically, you know, just had medical procedures and stuff. If you want to count him as a returner, if you want to count him as an incoming high school player, I think either one is valid. And then the last one technically would be Jaden Nickens, the two-sport player for the KU football team, who's a receiver, basketball player. I think his scholarship will count for football, though, so it won't count there. One thing to keep in mind, KU still does have one scholarship to give as part of the self-imposed penalties that were accepted by the NCAA and IRP and whatever the I don't even remember the name of the review process that came after that. Nonetheless, with the new whole rev share thing, basketball is up to 15 scholarships. So that basically means Kansas is at 14 scholarships for this upcoming season, which, even though it's less than the 15 originally, it's actually more than you would have originally had. 13 was the previous number for scholarships. That said, the one thing that goes away with this is kind of walk-ons. So it'll be interesting to see how KU fills out the back end of that roster, right? Because realistically, you might only be playing a 7, 8, or 9-man rotation. Do you really want your 12th guy being somebody who's expecting big minutes from you, right? And so do you put a couple walk-ons on scholarship, so to speak, at the back end of that roster? Jaden Nickens, interesting how that's going to work out with that whole scholarship thing from that perspective, because there aren't really walk-ons. So I guess, does he just count to a scholarship in football and basketball? I'm not entirely sure on how that works, but honestly, doesn't really matter for the importance of this conversation. So you have those guys coming in. That would mean basically 3 scholarships if we're not counting Nickens, which I'm not going to right now. Then you look at the possible returners to the team. Let's start with the guys that it seems like the scuttlebutt is that these guys seem likely to return. I think Elmarko Jackson, right? I mean, redshirt sophomore. Part of the process here is a player going to transfer away? It's a two-way street. It's the player street of, hey, I want more. And that more could be minutes. It could be stardom. It could be opportunity at a school that's going to give you more limelight, which that doesn't really apply for Kansas because you're not going to get more than Kansas. It applies for other schools. So that one, again, doesn't apply for Kansas, but more money at another school, right? The role and the money, those are kind of the two big ones, though. And then there's the Kansas street of things, which is, we think we can get a better player than you in the portal, or we think you've stalled out in development. We don't think we can get anything else out of you. hey, you can stick around, but you're not going to play next year because you're going to be behind all these guys that we bring in. So it's probably in your best interest, and it would help us out too if you leave. There's that view. There's also now the new view of things with the current portal era where it's like, yeah, we like you. Oh, wait, you and your agency are asking for how much money now? You're wanting to double what you made last year? Yeah, at that point, you should go. You should enter into the portal. And that becomes a difficult thing too, because it's like, our agents just asking for more just to ask for more because they think they can get it? Are they asking for more because they actually are like, oh, we're going to test this kid in the portal? But I do feel like Elmarko will be back. And I think from the Kansas perspective too, you don't bring this kid in and play him as much as he did as a freshman and stick through him with all this out for the season with injury to not see the fruits of your labor. So Elmarko, we'll see what jump he can make this next year. The thing that sucks is I feel like a year 3, technically year 2, Elmarko would make a jump. But the question is that jump negated by overcoming an injury as bad as he had? But he showed up to the Darryn Peterson event. I don't know if that's like telling at all of like guys who are going to stick around. And that the guys that showed up to that, I don't know, but that would certainly be of interest there. Then you have, at this point, kind of in that same group, like Jamari, McDowell, Marquise Passmore. Feels like those guys would be back. Would it be shocking if either transferred to say, hey, I want to chase a bigger role? No, it would not, but that's kind of where we are in the portal. Well, nothing would be shocking at this point in time for anybody leaving. So I'm under the assumption both will be back. That brings you up to 6 scholarship players between the 3 freshmen coming on and then Jackson, McDowell, and Passmore. Then you get into the this player's going to have an opportunity to do, what he kind of wants, and that's Flory Bidunga. He could go to the NBA draft combine. He could kill it in tests. I mean, obviously a freaky athlete and incredible measurements and stuff on the wingspan, I would imagine. He could even test the portal and see how much money he can get somewhere else. I lean toward Flory being back just from a standpoint of it feels like he has a lot to gain this season when in theory he would be the starting center. And, if he has a very productive season, probably turns into a first-round draft pick. And I think things would set up for that to happen. So I lean toward him being back. But again, you never really know in the portal. So that would give you 7 scholarship players. And then we get to the list of just like, okay, Diggy Coy is somebody who has voiced his pleasures of wanting to come back. And Kansas has mentioned they've liked him in terms of the hard work he puts in and that he is kind of a dog, so to speak, in a good way, that, he has that good mentality to him. The only question is, does his side of things want more than what Kansas wants to do for a guy that they probably view as, hey, if you can be somewhere between our 6th and 9th man, that's kind of what we're looking for here. And does he view it as, oh, it's year 2 in the program now, like now I'm going to be the guy, right? That becomes the big question there. But he could be back. And then the other ones that it's like, okay, this is either a coin flip or probably not coming back. I feel like with Clements, it's a coin flip. We just don't know. Does he want to go somewhere for what would be his final season of college basketball? I guess maybe he could have 2 years if he gets a medical redshirt for this year. But, does he want to start getting more playing time? He almost left a couple of years ago. Does it actually happen now? AJ Storr feels like he's probably gone in that bucket. Like that was probably a decision made from his camp before the season even ended at this point in time. And then the Rylan Griffen one, I feel like is the ultimate 50-50. It could go either way. He showed up to the Darryn Peterson event that went on in Lawrence. Is that indicative of him, wanting to stick around? Is that indicative of him just being like, oh, cool, the player who might be the number 1 pick in next year's draft is coming to town. I want to see him play. I like basketball. I play basketball. Cool. We'll go watch this guy play. Could be that. But maybe that is something that is a little bit telling there. And I'll be very interested with that one, specifically because going back to the two-way street thing, does Kansas want him back, right? I would think that from a standpoint of, hey, you're going to need shooters around Darryn Peterson, you would want Rylan Griffen back. And from a standpoint of players typically do better, the more years they've been in the Bill Self system, I would think they would want Rylan Griffen back. At the same point in time, doesn't feel like the players who it's like you're kind of one-trick ponies, which in the case of Rylan Griffen, that one trick is a very good one when he's on. Obviously didn't finish the season on, but it's shooting the 3 ball. Those players haven't typically enamored Bill Self, and so does he want to go away from that? So I think that's the most interesting of the internal decisions. What do you do with Rylan Griffen? Then it's beyond that. It is, how much of your NIL budget do you spend on retaining players? I think that's super important when you look at Bill Self teams. I would spend more money almost on, I guess it depends year to year, right? With this year, you don't have like, besides Flory, you don't have like a bunch of returning players that you should have to pay like $1 million each or something, but you got to make sure you get Flory back. I wouldn't hate to have Rylan Griffen back. I know the season, it almost felt like kind of checked out over the last month and didn't end the way that you probably wanted it to, but I still think he could benefit playing with Darryn Peterson. Okay, what are some of the external decisions that KU has to make about the transfer portal? Today's episode of the show is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Daylight savings snuck up on us again. And if you're feeling a lost hour of sleep, 5 Hour Energy has your back. The extra sunshine means more time for fun, but sometimes you need a little boost to power through. Whether you're staying up late watching the NCAA tournament, squeezing in a round of golf after work, or just trying to keep up with your busy day, 5 Hour Energy gives you that quick, refreshing pick-me-up wherever you need it. I've been staying up late watching basketball games, NAIA tournament, NCAA tournament, all of it, and need a little pick-me-up both in the morning and kind of around that like nap time during the day. 5 Hour Energy helps keep you going through the day. Head to 5hourenergy.com, find over 15 flavors to choose from, including watermelon, blue raspberry, and peach mango. You can even build your own 12-pack or 24-pack delivered right to your door. You know what, right now, grab a 20 or a 5 Hour Energy shot at your local grocery or convenience store. They are everywhere. Stock up today and stay energized with 5 Hour Energy. What are some of the external decisions KU has to make about the transfer portal and Bill Self here? Obviously, they have to make decisions on all the guys returning. Do they want them back? What role do they want them in? How much NIL money are they comfortable spending on them before they say, okay, just leave town, go somewhere else? But the external decisions are maybe even more interesting because it's how do you fill the roster out around Darryn Peterson? I do think the Flory conversation of doing everything in your power to make sure he comes back is probably the most pertinent of all of these here, right? I mean, if you're looking for guys in the transfer portal, guys who could potentially be first-round draft picks as soon as the following NBA draft, they would be at the top of everyone's list. Well, you have the opportunity to bring a guy back in Flory if you take care of him the right way, maybe over the offseason, right? So that's the most important. But externally, this is less about, and I think in the intricate way of looking at it is, yes, you do have all the individual decisions that you will make that will, lead to sliding door moments of, oh, you took this player over this player. And those are so important. Kansas has to hit this year. They have not hit the past couple of years. There's so many of those sliding door moments. There's the Harrison Ingram moments, right? There's the Kobe Bryant moments. There's the LeBaron Philon moments. There's the, I guess maybe even like the Grant Nelson moments. There's so many moments you could go to with, they took player X over player Y, and it did or did not work out. And seemingly over the last couple of years, it has not worked out more than it has worked out, right? That's how you get in a point where Kansas has been over these last 2 years compared to, where the expectations are for the program. So yes, those are the intricate decisions. But I think one big one here is how many transfers in do you want, right? Part of that is going to be dependent on how many guys stick around the program. But going back to the idea of who do you stay, who do you tell to let go, and those sort of things, do you have a set number where you're like, yeah, I'm cool overpaying to keep some more guys around, so we have to bring in less transfers? And then what do you do at the high school level, right? You already have 3 high school recruits coming in, and who knows if all of them make it here. We've seen in the past couple of years, right? I mean, LeBaron Philon last year, Marcus Adams a couple of years ago. We've seen this happen now over recent years where Kansas has players committed. I don't know why this one just popped in my mind, Sidney Curry from the JUCO ranks, that they have them committed, and then all of a sudden, once it gets closer to the season, maybe they bring in some extra transfers. All of a sudden, that player goes, oh, I'm not really going to play this year. And they say, I'm going to ask out of my NLI. I'm going to go somewhere else, right? That's entirely possible. But do you look for some more high school recruits as opposed to saying, hey, because I was going through those scholarship numbers, and I was, I got to 6 or 7, and then we kind of got to the point where it was like, okay, some of these guys are maybe more coin flips, right? Let's say you even brought back 8 players. That would leave you 6 open scholarships, And are you really wanting to fill all 6 in the transfer portal when A, that almost feels like it increases your chance of having a flub? B, it's going to be hard because you're not going to want all 6 of those guys to be star players. You're going to want some of those players to come in and understand that their role is to be the 7th guy, is to maybe even just be depth, who's a 10th guy who has a chance to, compete. You tell them they have a chance to compete to get in the rotation, and they honestly do, but that there is a chance that, you might just be playing spot minutes game to game. you want guys who are comfortable in those roles if it happens, so that you don't have a situation like this year where there are probably guys who are unhappy in the locker room given their role. You want guys who are happy with their role kind of no matter what it ends up being. And so those are specific types of players that aren't always available in the portal when you cross the guys who are both good enough to play at Kansas, even in a backup role, along with the money you'd be spending and along with that specific role. So that's where it kind of becomes difficult of making those decisions. So are you better off just going out and getting a couple kids from the high school ranks? And this is a tough thing too, because in today's day and age, if you spend a year or two developing a high school kid who you might be thinking nowadays, hey, he could be a good player by the time he's a junior, by the time he's a senior, by the time he's a redshirt junior. But by the time that happens, he's going to transfer after a year or two just because the playing time wasn't there by the time he was a second-year player or by the time he's a third-year player. So why even bother bringing that player in? But I just look at it and see how well Bill Self has done developing players inside the program. Let's say you do have 6 scholarships in the end to give out. I wouldn't hate if you said, hey, 4 of those are going to go to transfer portal players, 2 of them are going to go to high school kids. And again, it can't just be I don't think you can just go into it saying, okay, we're doing exactly this many this way, exactly this many this way. You do have to let it come to you a little bit, right? If there's only one high school kid that is uncommitted or available that you actually feel like can turn into a good player, yeah, you don't take 2 just to take 2 in that situation. But I wouldn't hate for some of those, at least 1 or 2 of those, to maybe go to a developmental high school kid, especially with the extended scholarship, so to speak, that you have the opportunity to kind of do just that. Then beyond that, the other decisions come into what types of transfers should they be going after? Are they going after? I think there's 2 ways to look at this. The type of player and the positions of player. So here's what I mean by the type of player. When I say what type of player are they going for, I kind of brought up earlier, it hasn't really worked with Bill Self, the one-trick pony, so to speak, right? There are a lot of teams where if they bring in a player who he's just out there to be a sniper, to be a shooter, right? He's going to have that specific role, and that's going to fit perfectly on that team. Unfortunately, that hasn't really worked for Canada. It feels like the one guy who's been able to make that work was Isaiah Moss. And I don't know, that maybe was just a very dependent to the team specifics, right? Because you had 3 basically non-shooters with Dotson, Marcus Garrett, Udoka Azubuike, who were all to different levels. Like Doak and Garrett were Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year level good. Dotson was a ball hawking, get some steals point guard that would turn it quickly into 2 points, that you really needed that shooting to another desperate level. So maybe that's just what makes that one a little bit different. But those players typically have not been in the favor, it seems like, of Bill Self. And so I'm to a point where I'm just like, okay, listen, I want to see modern basketball. I want to see shooting. I want to see offense. But like at the end of the day, if that's going to lead to confliction, if that's going to lead to, friction between Bill Self and that player, that's just going to hurt the rest of the locker room or be a storyline and a black cloud over the course of the season, don't do it. Just go for the guy you trust. Go for the guy that you are going to enjoy playing with. Go for a team of, right, like hypothetically, if you have the option between, and this doesn't work because Kevin McCullough was, third team All-American his last year, and Rylan Griffen, struggled mightily at the end of the season. But just in terms of player archetype, right? Let's say you have the option between a Marcus Garrett, maybe that's a better example, or a Rylan Griffen. As much as I would, and again, maybe that's a bad one because he's Defensive Player of the Year. But like, if you have the option here between the archetype of a player who's tough, who's a dog, who's going to rebound, but he's only 30% from 3, versus a player who's 38% from 3, but he doesn't do anything else, at this point, give me the guy who's a dog, because I know that guy's going to have a much smoother transition with Bill Self, and we don't have to worry about all the crap we had this year. Because a team that trusts each other, a team that plays the way Bill Self wants it to, even if it's not the prettiest, even if they're not the best three-point shooting team, we know those teams can at least grind out wins. And do what he wants to do, and they're going to be on the same page. And I'd rather everybody be on the same page and maybe not be as offensively talented than the flip side where they have talent, but it doesn't come together because it doesn't fit into what Bill Self wants. Now, in an ideal world, you have somebody who can do both, right? You have somebody who can play defense and shoot, or can shoot and rebound, right? That you get multifaceted players. That would be the most ideal. But I'm just saying, if you have to pick one or the other, I'm at a point where I would kind of say that. Now, as far as what types of positions they bring in. That question here going to be very interesting to see, because I think it definitely makes sense to bring in like some sort of guard. Do you go for more of a true point guard, right, where he can help set up Darryn Peterson? Sounds like they want Darryn Peterson to have the ball in his hands a lot, though, and to play even a little bit of point guard. Now, it feels like some of that was the plan with Quentin Grimes, and then Devon Dotson was basically the point guard the whole way through, and that's part of why Quentin Grimes transferred, because he wanted to play more point guard. The irony there is he became a basically 3-and-D wing in Houston and turned into a first-round draft pick, but that's neither here nor there. If you want Darryn Peterson more as playing some point guard, I think it makes sense to bring in a guard who's like a combo guard, who you can say, hey, when Peterson goes to the bench, you take over the point guard duties. And maybe Elmarko Jackson can be that guy for you, but I think you need to bring somebody else in, both to give you another experienced player and a scorer, because with Elmarko, we don't know for sure that the shot's going to come around. We don't know for sure how he's going to do off the injury. I think in an ideal world, you bring in a really good combo guard that can play next to Darryn Peterson. One of them can be the one play. One of them can be the two that play. Then they can switch another play or later in the game, or when one's to the bench, the other's the point guard. And then you're in a role with Elmarko where you can play the one or the two, and he's giving you 20, 25 minutes per game of really good rim pressure, athleticism, and defense, to where then all of a sudden you see flashes from Elmarko in that specific role, where he's basically your third guard playing two positions, to where then the next season, Darryn Peterson's gone, maybe the combo guard's gone because maybe he's a senior, and then all of a sudden you're feeling great that Elmarko, at that point as a redshirt junior, is going to have a breakout season, right? Like, that's the ideal path for me with what you do there. Then you look at the wing. They certainly need to bring in a wing to some respect, and if Rylan Griffen ends up leaving too, you definitely need one at that point in time. The question is, do you bring somebody in who's a bench wing, or do you bring somebody in who's a good enough wing to start? And what do you do at the 4 position? Because that ties in the wing position. But does Bill Self want to go for more of a true wing? Does he want to go for more of a power forward? Does he want to go for somebody who is a 4-5 man who can play the 4 or the 5, right? That's going to be interesting. I almost feel like Bill Self wants to play 2 big basketball, right? So maybe it's going to be a traditional power forward, but I would personally like a wing, but that's kind of my thinking of how it's going to go. And then the last one here is just like, I think you need a backup center to Flory, right? You need somebody who, because Flory's going to be in his first year starting. If Flory gets in foul trouble a game, you have to have somebody dependable who can come in. And at the very least, even if Flory is starting and avoids that foul trouble, and he's playing 25, 28 minutes a night, still leaves 12 to 15 minutes that you need from backup center. And maybe some of that is Bryson Tiller. Maybe all of it is Bryson Tiller. But you'd like to have that veteran option you can go to just in case that you can have a little bit more in that situation. Let's finish up here. Darryn Peterson was just playing at Haskell. This episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by Game Time, where you can get tickets to all sorts of sporting events or music or comedy or theater near you. And imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd and witnessing unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person. Getting tickets shouldn't be stressful. That's where Game Time comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. With Game Time Picks, their curation makes it easier to find better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And they have easy ticket shopping. I mean, you can just check the Game Time app, and you're talking amazing deals on some huge matchups upcoming, whether you're looking into all this action going on right now on the court, or you're looking into, getting something for baseball with the Royals coming up here and opening day coming up. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown. Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Well, don't forget to make Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. You can check out Locked On College Basketball for your second listen every day. So Darryn Peterson was just in Lawrence. He got to visit Allen Fieldhouse, maybe get some shots up. His team was playing prolific prep in a tournament where the semifinals and finals were in Haskell. His team won the semifinal round, and it wasn't the biggest stats of the world for Darryn Peterson. He was just 4 for 12 from the floor, but this is the beauty. Like, to me, as much as you want to judge a player on his best day, which might have been that game against AJ DeBonsa, the number one recruit, where he had like 60 points and did everything and making, game-winning shots and stuff, that does matter. But I love judging players based on, honestly, their worst game. Because if you still are producing in your worst game or your middle games, like the consistency, that's when you know you are a star. Like you think about if you were watching the NCAA tournament, like the second round, like Walter Clayton, who's first-team All-American for Florida, he didn't have his best game, right? He was struggling for the first, 25, 30 minutes of that game, 35 maybe even. And then he hits like two huge – or I forget if it was 1 or 2 threes down the stretch, but he's also making like a big pass on he's making big plays. And the three that he makes a 60 or 70, 64. He's still finding a way to impact the game. And that was always the thing with like, Frank Mason, for instance. You would look up and it's like, oh, you have 16 points and like 5 assists or something. And then his normal games, you get 20, and then the big games, you're getting 25 or 30. Well, Darryn Peterson went 4 of 12 in this game. He still had 21 points, 4 rebounds, and 2 assists. And he still makes a half-court shot. He still is like making plays when his team really needs it, when the game is getting to a moment where he can play. And then in the championship round, the shooting percentage goes back up, I think 9 of 16. He has 23 points. Like, he's just a do-it-all player who how could you not be worried that the hype is getting like too much? That like it almost feels like the hype has gotten to a certain point where like it's almost like with Andrew Wiggins. Andrew Wiggins put up like 17 and 6 per game. On like pretty good splits, like 45, 44%, something like that. And, mids from 30 from 3. But because of the way he went out, the final game wasn't good. And because it always felt like there was more meat on the bone because he didn't have that like alpha mentality, that it was like, oh, he should have been averaging 20 and 8. Instead of just being like, holy cow, this freshman just gave us 17 and 6 per game. And that's my worry with Darryn Peterson. He's going to come in and score like 16 and 6 per game with 3.5 assists. And it's like, wow, that would be a really good freshman season. But it's like the hype has gotten to a point where it's like you're expecting this dude to be Danny Manning or Wilt Chamberlain, which is probably unfair to him. But like, I am buying into the hype. I am buying into the hype that this dude is going to come in right away and be, a first-team All-American, that he's going to be one of the 5 best players. And that is scary. That is scary to take that leap of faith. I think as a fan with a freshman who hasn't played a game of college basketball. But I did find this quote interesting because he was asked after the semifinal game, which KU basketball player he was most excited to play with next year. He said Flory Bidunga. And there's some weird, like, behind-the-scenes rumblings about right now, like, oh, is Flory going to test the waters, or is Flory going to test the portal and see what his price should be for Kansas, things like that. I don't know how true any of that is. Right now, it's ultimate rumor season. And part of the difficulty with rumors, I think, right now, our agents create a lot of them. I think as much as everybody wants to blame this or that or whatever in the landscape of college basketball, I think agents are a big reason why we have as much chaos as we do. They are the shadow puppeteers orchestrating a lot of stuff that makes a lot of this chaotic and a mess, to be completely honest with you. And a lot of them are just very greedy, in it for the money. And I don't mean to degrade because I'm sure there's some good wielding agents out there that, that's not the case, but like, that's kind of a thing. So tough to tell some of those rumors stuff, but Flory was at the game too, right? And how could you not, if you're some of these players, be like, oh, I want to play with this dude, right? Like, that'd make me want to come back, right? If you were on the borderline, like, probably going to get you some open shots. It's going to be really cool to tell your grandkids, hey, I played with that dude. It ends up being like future NBA Hall of Famer or something like that. All right, I need to slow down the expectations again here. But anyway, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show. We're going to get into some transfer portal targets on tomorrow's episode of the show, so stick around for that right here with LOJ.